Our story begins in Franklin County, Kansas. "Get him, Alex," said Steve. Alex replied back with a sarcastic, "Oop, Mr. Boss." The two youngsters were playing a classic game of Minecraft factions. Steve was chasing down a noob and he wanted to get him. "You let him get away, Alex," said Steve. "I'm sorry, I needed to heal up." "Whatever, let's just go do something else." "Okay." Steve was an average 11-year-old. He liked to play video games and didn't like going to school. Steve was wearing a blue t-shirt with black gym shorts, his favorite. His best friend was Alex, a girl he had known since the first grade. They had always done everything together, whether it was playing a game or playing at the park. They were best friends. However, soon that would all change. Steve was getting ready to shut off his computer when all of a sudden a news alert popped up on the top of his screen. He looked at the words as they slowly crossed the top of his screen. The words said, "Alert, alert, Paris, France is currently under lockdown due to the outbreak of a new developing virus. The authorities are calling it the Lenny Virus. The military is asking for volunteers to help with the cause. All volunteers are asked to please report to the nearest army building to join. Thank you. Be safe. Alert, alert, Whoa, what the heck? What was that about?" Steve said quietly to himself. Steve ran quickly over to Alex's house across the street to ask if she had seen the news. Steve knocked on the door very quickly and waited for Alex to answer. Alex came to the door and asked, "What's going on in Europe? I just saw the news on my computer too." Steve replied, "I'm not sure, but it seems pretty serious. They had to shut down the city." Said Alex. "You think we should check it out?" said Steve. "I don't know, it seems pretty serious and our parents wouldn't let us do anything like that," Alex replied curiously. "We're only 11, it just seems a bit crazy, but maybe we can spread the word about to others close by." Steve didn't know at the time, but by saying those words he had just caused him and his soon-to-be friends a world of death. Steve and Alex started to put up ads around their small Franklin County about helping out with the situation in Paris. To their own surprise, people actually started to show up at the now-made table the two had made in Steve's front yard. "Wow, we've already had 20 come to sign up for the cause," Alex said. "I think we should go with these people," said Steve. "Are you crazy? We're 11 years old. Some of these people are triple our age. We can't compete with them," screamed Alex. "To be friends, a world of death." "Relax. We can do it, Alex. Our parents would never find out and we could become heroes of the world." "Steve, what have you been eating lately? Are you out of your mind? Sneaking away from home so we can go help something we have little information about at all? We're likely to get left behind and possibly killed." Over the next few days Alex's mind started to change. "Maybe we can possibly do this. A bunch of kids from our class have already sneaked out and signed up to help. You know what, maybe we can do this, Steve. We'll have a bunch of help from others," said Alex. Just then, Ethan showed up at the front of the table. "Count me in," said Ethan. "Whoa, look like you finally showed up after all," said Steve, who was covering for Alex while she was getting lemonade. "Yeah, Joseph convinced to be help out yesterday and I decided I would give it a shot. I heard that a good majority of our class had already joined, so I didn't want to be left out." "Alright Ethan, I'll sign you in right now. We recruited over 400 people, Ethan. We went to the recruitment center and they said they were taking a bunch of people over the Atlantic Ocean to help with the cause. We have one more week to recruit, then we're headed to Europe. By then the virus might have spread even more and it will be dangerous. You have to know this, Ethan." "Alright Steve. I can handle it." Alex just returned with 2 glasses of lemonade and said, "Here, take this, you'll need it." 1 week later, they had finished. By now Alex and Steve had gathered a group 1,000 people strong. Out of all these people, There were great warriors and leaders. These included the Swamp Fox, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, Hercules, the team captains, and Harriet Tubman. These were all great warriors, and Steve felt confident that they would help greatly in their journey. It was nearing the time for the group to leave, and all 1,000 people had shown up in Steve's small neighborhood. Of course, the parents in the neighborhood were wondering what was going on, so Steve had to lie. "What on earth is going on here? Is that Harriet Tubman I see?" said Steve's mom. "Yeah. Pretty much we're having a big gathering to celebrate great leaders from the past." "Okay. Seems legit," said Steve's mom. As soon as Steve's mom left, they were off. The buses were picking them up 2 miles down the road in 5 minutes, so they had to hurry. As soon as they all reached the buses, they climbed on. They all had their overnight luggage with them, so they were pretty much ready. Some people had swords and guns. Steve and Alex just had changes of clothes and their toothbrushes. They sat next to Nathan and Rund. Rund said, "So, we're really going through with this?" "Yep. It'll take about 19 hours for us to get to Charleston, South Carolina. We'll just play cards and stuff until we get there," said Steve. "All right, sounds good," replied Rund. Just then, Nathan sneezed. "Are you okay, Nathan?" said Alex. "Yeah, I'm fine, just allergies." After about 12 hours, everyone was out cold and snoring. Steve and Alex were the only ones awake on the bus still. "Almost there, I think," said Alex. "Yeah, I just hope nothing wrong happens out there, you know?" "I know, Steve. We'll be a long way from home and with people we don't know. But we're all here for the same reason." "Yeah, I guess," said Steve. "Anyway, see you when we get there, Alex." Steve then fell into a nice deep sleep. Steve woke up with a bright light focused on his face. "Get up, guys. Time to get on the ships." There was a man standing 3 feet away from him looking directly at him. The man looked to be about 40 with a full beard. The man was funny to Steve and he laughed quietly at the man. All right, I'm up," said Steve. The man walked off the bus. As everyone started to wake up, the bus started to get noisy. Steve started hearing things like, "Hurry, we're going to miss it." "Get up, blockhead. What time is it?" Steve finally got up from his sleep position, now fully awake. Others were slowly walking off the bus in a single file line. Steve hopped in. "Morning, Alex. How'd you sleep?" said Steve. "Like an angel," Alex replied with a sarcastic tone. In about 2 hours, everyone was boarded on the heavy-loaded battleships. There were huge guns loaded onto the sides of the ship, things that could demolish pretty much anything. Living in Kansas his whole life, Steve never got to see things like this. He was pretty much blown away. These guns would come in handy very soon, though. Soon the boats began to move. When it first began, Steve nearly fell over, it was so much force. He was in a 20-person room. There were 10 on each battleship. So in total there were 5 battleships ready for battle. Steve was in a room with the rest of his classmates, so he didn't have any trouble getting to know anyone. He shared a bunk with Nathan. They had a water fountain in the room so they could get some water whenever they wanted it. There was a table in the middle of the big room that had cards and board games so the kids could stay entertained. Soon all the kids in the room were immersed in fun and games. After about an hour of playing, Steve had to use the restroom. He excused himself and walked out the room to the restroom down the hall. When he arrived, there were 2 doors, each marked with a different sign related to which gender the bathroom was made for. Of course, Steve walked into the boys' bathroom. When Steve walked in, it was a horrid sight. There was blood covering the walls and what he thought to be a cut-off finger lay in the corner of the room. Steve then saw a body in the corner of the room chopped up into pieces. Steve sat and looked at what the mess before him for a good solid minute. He had no idea of what had happened in there, so he ran out when he snapped back into his senses. He ran down to the captain's quarters and told Hercules of what he had just seen. It was a mess. Blood everywhere. I have no idea of what just happened in there. Steve was cut off by Hercules quickly. Kid, I feared this would happen. Somebody aboard this ship is a killer. He or she killed that man you saw in the bathroom and then left. I'll do my best to hunt down this individual, but you have to stay calm. You're a brave kid, Steve, for being able to tell me this. Do me a favor and don't tell anybody else about this. I don't want them to find out, or else they might freak out and give up. That's the last thing we need. Finish Hercules. Okay, I'll try, responded Steve. Steve then walked out and headed back to his room, thinking about the horrid sight he had just seen and wondered how he could hide it from his friends. Not that it would matter later. Over the next few weeks, Steve began to get used to the ship life. An occasional killing from the unknown slasher and the occasional suicide because the person just simply couldn't take it anymore. Steve had grown unusually close to Hercules. Ever since he had seen the first killing and talked to Hercules, he looked up to him as a mentor, a teacher. He started to help Hercules around the ship and started growing through the ranks on the ship. He was growing away from Alex and the rest of his friends. He stopped hanging out with some of the people he used to. Steve started to feel a lot older and thought very great of himself since he was hanging out with Hercules, the leader of the fleet. Yep, life was pretty good for Steve. Once again, that would all change soon. Steve was hanging out in his room reading The Odyssey by Homer when George walked in covered in blood. Good Lord, it was a terrible sight. George is telling this story. I was on the back of the ship when all of a sudden the swamp fox walked and sang, "My golly, that was a terrible woman I just ran into. She was very rude. I told him to go eat some leaves, then walked out on him." I replied with, "Gosh, Swamp Fox, that sounds very rude. Did she get mad at you?" Swamp Fox then said, "I didn't get to see her really, I just walked off. Then, I saw Harriet Tubman turned the corner. She pulled out a spoon and shanked his eye out of socket, so he put a leaf over it thinking it would he since he was one with the swamp, but it didn't work out. It was gushing blood and tears, but he didn't cry, though he was the Swamp Fox and he had no feelings or a soul. Harriet Tubman looked at him and started shanking his stomach until his insides poured out like jello. Then she moved on to the spinal cavities, where she grabbed spinal cords and ripped them out like a child would with teeth. It was easy peasy. The Swamp Fox stayed strong and it didn't affect him at all except partial blindness in his soul, which he grew since he loved Harriet and was honored to die by her hands. She grabbed his lifeless, detained, bloated and slimy corpse and dragged it and hung him from the ship's mast like the mermaid on a pirate ship, except this was no pirate ship. Harriet said, "Swamp Fox, I always knew you were weak. I'm disappointed." She grabbed his body from the mast and slit his throat and it started gushing blood. He was still alive but felt no pain. He was one with the swamp and ocean waters. Harriet grabbed his body and threw it overboard. But, as she watched, she saw him. Words come out of his mouth that was unhinged from his neck like a snake. "There's a reason they call me the Swamp Fox." Then a shark came down from the heavens and ate him alive, where he can be with the gods of the swamp forever and ever. Steve was speechless. Georgia, are you alright? The way you described that scene was pretty horrific." Georgia replied with, "I know. That's exactly how it happened, just the way I told you. I didn't leave a single detail out." Georgia then left without saying another word. Up ahead. It is very deadly and we will engage in lethal weapons to take care of it. Prepare yourselves for battle, everyone. We're going in. Steve's first instinct was to run to Hercules to ask him how he could help out with the beast, but then he thought of Alex. Steve had not talked to her in several days now, and he began to feel terrible. So he ran to her and made sure she was safe. "Alex, are you all right?" Steve yelled at her across the room. "Yeah, I'm fine, Steve. Thanks," Alex replied lazily. "All right, I'm going to go help Hercules at the mast and check out this beast." "Okay, Steve, be safe." Too bad those words would not save his friends. Steve ran to the mast of the ship to see Hercules standing there with a set of binoculars. He seemed to be very focused on something. "Hercules, how close is it?" Hercules replied with, "Kid, if that's what I think it is, we're going into something we might not make it out of." "What is it?" Hercules hesitated a few seconds before saying, "Danke." Steve was curious. He had never heard of anything by the name of Danke. Steve was about to ask Hercules what it was, when all of a sudden a ship to the right of them flipped over. Danke was basically a donkey, and it was 300 feet tall. It also had black shades, a gold and a sideways cap on. But instead of having hooves, it had sharp claws. Steve looked over to the right and saw a red mist floating around in the air. He heard the sounds of screams as innocent lives were being taken. He saw the donkey in its prime. It was tossing people into its mouth left and right by the dozens. Limbs were flying everywhere. He saw heads and internal organs all over the place. Then, out of the corner of his eye, ESA was being picked up by the beast. He saw what no man should ever witness. The monster first grabbed ESA's skin and slowly peeled it off like peeling an orange. Surely ESA was already dead, but the beast was just rubbing it in. He grabbed ESA's heart in his hands and ate it. He chewed in a slow way that made Steve want to throw up. He tried to look away but he couldn't for some reason. His eyes were glued on ESA's now dismembered body. Chaos was still ravaging the boat on the right. In 10 more minutes, all of the people on the flipped boat were all dead. No bodies left, just blood, flesh, and organs float in the water. The donkey then made a loud screech and went under once again, ready to slaughter its next victim. Over the next few hours as they sailed, the waves began to get rough. The winds started to increase and it became very chaotic. Steve knew what it was, a sea storm. The donkey must have caused it after it was done mopping up the boat on the right. Several people fell off the boat, one including Lenny Virus. She was never seen again. All of a sudden, a huge wave crashed into the ship and everything went black. Alarms were blaring all over the ship as the ship wasn't moving anymore. Kids were screaming and crying. They had no idea what was going on, neither did Steve. He ran to the front of the boat and saw what had happened. They had crashed on an island. The island was a beautiful sight. He could see a huge waterfall and trees everywhere. There were birds chirping and squirrels on the ground. He forgot everything else for a split second, then came back to the real world. He shouldn't be happy. They had crashed on an unknown island and the ship was likely stuck. The other ships had also crashed, and they were all slowly walking down onto the lovely island. Steve heard somebody call his name from behind. He turned around to see Alex right in front of him. "Steve, what's going on? Do you know anything?" "No," Steve replied. "All I know is that we crashed on this island and I think we're stuck." Then, Steve heard Hercules' voice up ahead. He was standing on a huge rock. "People of the fleet, we have crashed on this island and you may lose hope, but do not fear. We will escape. We have lifeboats that can still get us to Europe. We are very close." All of a sudden Steve could hear voices in the crowd of 800 now that one ship had gone under. "Are we really that close? What if there isn't enough lifeboats to carry us all to safety?" Steve then thought on that sentence he had just heard. The man was right. There's no way they had enough lifeboats to fit everyone on. The battleships were already crowded as is. Then Steve saw something out of the corner of his eye. It was Nathan. He was being attacked by something that Steve couldn't quite make out. Everyone turned to see a great beast on top of Nathan, tearing at his skin. Nathan was struggling, but somehow keeping it away from him. Everyone ran over to Nathan, but it was too late. The lion bit Nathan's leg off with its teeth, then went for the neck. Hercules was the one who shot the beast right through the brain before it killed Nathan. The beast fell off of Nathan with a thud, and Steve could hear Nathan screaming in agony. Nathan's leg was still lodged between the lion-like creature lying on the ground beside him. Hercules quickly grabbed Nathan, then ran him onto the ship and disappeared into the medic's room. "My gosh, glad I wasn't that guy," said Ethan with a smile. Steve felt like he should say something inspirational to the crowd, but he just couldn't find the words. After about 3 hours of laying around on the island, Hercules and Nathan returned. Nathan's leg was wrapped in bandage, and he had a crutch. Nathan seemed to be fine other than fact he was missing his left leg completely. He sat down on a rock and focused on Hercules. "All right guys, let's stay confident. Nathan is all right. He's still in good condition. In 1 hour, we'll move out and search the island for anything useful. We'll split up into groups of 100. 8 groups of 100. I'll handpick a leader in each group." The 1 hour ended quick. Hercules rounded everyone up and put them all into groups. I was separated from Alex but with my schoolmates. Hercules chose the leaders of the groups quickly that he was finally at our group. To my surprise, he said to me, "Steve, I believe in you. I want to lead this group of people across the island. I think you are ready. Good luck." Steve was taken by joy as Hercules said those words. He finally could prove himself as a good leader. "All right everyone, I say we head north up the beach until we find something interesting. Who's got the weapons?" I heard Ethan and Joseph emerge from the crowd. "We got guns and knives. We'll take care of any beast if they show up," said Ethan and Joseph. "Good, I'll take point up the beach. Let's move." They walked up the beach for only 10 minutes when something jumped out from behind a rock and ripped open Joseph's stomach. Steve looked away and saw Ethan firing his M9 at the mutated lion. Ethan shot it in the head a bunch until it finally was dead. Poor Joseph, he was a pile of blood and flesh, barely recognizable. A couple of more times the beast ate people, and a couple more times Ethan shot it in the head several times. By the time we finally made it to the other side of the island to regroup with the others, it had been 5 hours. Something seemed different though. It took Steve a while to figure it out. There were 2 groups missing. The 6 remaining groups waiting for 2 hours for the other 2 groups to show up, but they never did. Nathan was a part of the group, and Steve had a feeling he knew why they didn't make it to the other side of the island. Hercules finally broke the silence and said, "All right guys, did anyone find anything useful?" Silence. "Anybody? Anything at all?" More silence. "Okay, let's head back." This time, Steve's group walked through the path where Group 5 was supposed to come out of. About halfway back, they started to smell a terrible stench. Then Ashley screamed. Steve ran over to her and he knew why she had reacted that way. Bodies. Ripped apart and totally gutted. Everybody had been ripped open and its insides were eaten right out. All of what was left of Brittany was her face. There must have been a pack of those things and they didn't have enough firepower to take the beast on. "All right guys, let's get moving so we don't end up like Group 5. Hours later they ran into trouble. Steve heard gunshots being fired behind and he spun around quickly. He saw 6 of them at first glance. Each one eating a different person. 3 of them were Steve's classmates. What he saw of what was left, Emma, Olivia, and Chloe. He couldn't recognize the others because they were so badly mauled. Looks like bringing their phones on the trip didn't work out so well. Ethan was now the only one with a gun and was firing frantically at the beast. He yelled, "Keep going, I'll hold them off. The lifeboats are just up ahead and you can make it." Steve wasn't going to let that happen. He ran back to Ethan and tackled one of the beasts. Steve was on top of one of them beating it with his fist. He had never realized how strong he was until he was actually using his strength. He bashed one of the beast's skulls in and got up, covered in blood. He turned around to see Ethan struggling with three of them trying to maul him. He quickly jumped at the group of beasts but was suddenly pulled backwards by a stronger force. He turned around to see Hercules dragging him away from the fight. "Ethan, no. Hercules, get your hands off me, you can't leave him for dead back there. You're a monster," Steve yelled in a killer voice. "We have to, kid. He's already dead." Steve could do nothing. Hercules' strength was too great. Steve could do no more. As Steve was being pulled away, he heard Ethan's cries behind him until it finally ceased. Steve was on a lifeboat with his fellow remaining classmates. Steve and his crew of kids could now see the coast of Portugal. They were only about an hour out. There were dozens of other lifeboats beside them, all headed to Portugal. They had a plan. After Steve was dragged away by Hercules back on the island, they made a plan to land on the coast of Portugal and work their way up to Paris. It would be a long journey, but they would make it. Nobody knew how bad Europe was going to be. It had been several months since the Lenny virus was first spotted. It could have taken over Europe for all Steve knew. Thinking about it scared him. He had never even seen a Lenny before, and the thought of one frightened him. Well, Steve didn't know this yet, but he was about to know what a Lenny was very well. "We're almost there, guys. Get ready to hit land." As everyone on his small lifeboat was gearing up, they were all armed with weapons now. Alex walked up to Steve. "Steve, do you have any idea of what we're going into?" "The things, Lennys, we don't even know what they are or what they can do. For all we know, they can be bloodthirsty killers who want us dead." Steve replied back with a stern look. "Alex, we've been through so much already. I don't think we can back down now. We can't. We've seen and done too many things that we just can't give up now. We're here." Steve looked at the terror that was before him. It was what Steve thought to be beach resort, but it was different. It was chaos. Buildings were on fire and there was dead bodies around every corner. Looks like Alex was right. Europe was gone. Eventually Hercules decided that it was best to stay together and in groups, so they slowly walked through the abandoned town. Every so often there would be a body somewhere or your occasional scream from somebody within the group. "Man, this place is a wreck," said Steve. "Got that right," said Nick, who just stepped up from the crowd. Several hours later, good luck finally came. They found an airport. "Is that real?" said Steve. It had been so long since something good had actually happened to the crew, so everyone thought it was a mirage. But indeed, it was real. There were working planes too. After they had gotten onto the runways of the airport, Hercules stepped up. "Anybody know how to fly a plane?" Dead silence. "Anyone at all?" Suddenly, out of the blue, a creature came out from behind the building and plunged and soared deep into Hercules' chest. Steve was the first one to step up. "No!" cried Steve. He took the sword from the creature and chopped off its head right there in the middle of the runway. He then kept on stabbing it until it was a big mess of flesh. He ran over to Hercules, who was still somewhat alive. He bent down and told Hercules it was going to be all right. Hercules responded, "Kid, now is your chance to show these people what a true leader is. I wasn't good enough. Maybe you will be. Stop these things. End this. You deserve it." Hercules' eyes started to close. "Oh yeah, one more thing, kid. Stop the bee." He was dead. Hercules, the mighty warrior, had been killed by a Lenny. Steve was outrageous. He paced back and forth for hours until he finally realized it was time to be the real leader and stop this somehow. Hercules was telling him something, but he couldn't finish. Then Steve realized something. He had no idea what Hercules' plan was to stop this. He said that they would take an airplane to France, where Hercules wanted them to go for some reason. That was where they could stop the Lenny virus, but how? He would go to France where it all started and maybe there would be clues to something there. There was only 400 left out of the 1,000 that had come. Steve had lost many friends. Ethan, Joseph, his classmates, Hercules. But he could not give up now. They had found 2 pilots actually that could fly planes, so it was no problem flying. 200 on each plane exactly. The flight would take about 2.5 hours until they reached Paris. People slept, cried, and mourned on the way there. Everyone was a pile of garbage. We had all been through so much, and I think some of them knew it wasn't going to be pretty once we hit Paris. I was the leader of this operation now. Hercules had put in charge with his few last words, and I had to avenge him. These people looked up to me now. Steve didn't intend on letting them down. Steve had just crossed the France border when it happened. They saw it coming 2 miles away, but there's nothing they could have done. A huge bird flew out of the clouds and hit the second plane dead on. Steve knew that there would be no survivors, including the giant bird. Steve could do nothing. He couldn't do anything. They were all dead, and Steve felt guilty. He felt as if it was his fault that everyone had died so far because of him. If he never would have gotten involved, all of his friends would still be alive. Not a pile of flesh and blood on the ground. Steve wanted revenge. He wanted to end these Lennys so badly that he could imagine what it would be like in his tiny head. He wanted to drink the blood of the Lennys after he had killed every last one of them and ended this once and for all. He wanted to be the hero that everyone loved and admired. He didn't want to be looked upon as the guy who got 1,000 people killed. He was going to make sure that was not the way people remembered him. It was another 30 minutes when they arrived at the Paris airport. They could see the Lennys from the plane windows. This was without a doubt the place the outbreak had started. They landed quickly and waited on the plane for a pep talk from Steve. "All right guys, this is it. It ends here. We will return home champions. Don't let the dead discourage you. We've all been through this together and we will fight together. We didn't let these people die in vain. Who's with me?" The crowd burst into yells of victory. "We can win this. It's not over. Let's kill these suckers." With those last words, they stormed out the plane and began battling their way to the gleaming star of Paris, the place where Steve thought Hercules wanted him to go. Steve and his remaining group of 200 had a time getting there. They saw thousands of Lennys all over the place. "Watch out guys, stick to the shadows so they don't see us," whispered Steve. They quietly sneaked around a horde of Lennys, but it was too late. Right in front of them, not even 30 feet away, was Lenny in the flesh. Steve couldn't believe his eyes. It was the most terrifying he had ever seen with his own 2 eyes. It had no expression on its white face other than a very creepy smile. Lenny had eyes that made Steve think of terrible things, made him remember all of his friends that had died because of Lenny. Steve wanted to kill Lenny at all costs, even if it required himself dying in the process. Steve lunged at Lenny. He tried to tackle Lenny, but Lenny was just too strong. He took Steve in his skinny hands and threw him farther down the street. Steve was amazed that just a small-armed thing could have such strength. That was when all of his friends charged at the monster. There was cries, blood, and bodies flying everywhere. Lenny had called for backup. They were all engaging in a hand-to-hand combat battle. Some had swords, but not many. Then Steve thought of Hercules' last words. "One more thing kid, stop the bomb." That was it. There was some kind of bomb on the Eiffel Tower. Steve grabbed as many people as he could, which was only 2, Georgia and Alex. He ran down the street with them behind, trying to keep up. Alex and Steve were already in the elevator, waiting. That was when Nathan showed up from behind an ally and his crutch went straight through George's chest, taking her heart out of her body. Her heart was on the ground, her body was still standing. She said one last sentence, like my Instagram photos, then she was gone. Next, Nathan lunged at Steve, covered in blood. Steve rapidly pressed the up button on the elevator and it began to close. Good thing it was fast. Nathan leapt from his crutches and dived at Steve, but he was too late. Nathan became caught between the closing door. The door slowly crushed Nathan. It was a sight to see. Guys, help me out. I am just kid. He never got to finish that sentence. You could hear Nathan's bones snapping. His eyes popped out of sockets and he started throwing up his organs. Out came the heart, intestines, kidney, it was all there. His spinal cord shot out of his back and landed outside. Blood now covered the small box. Steve and Alex just kept going up, focused on one goal: destroy Lenny. When they reached the top, they could see the bomb attached to a small pole. Steve started to walk to it to defuse it. All he had to do was click a button to turn it off. That was when Lenny walked out from behind the pole and was standing in front of Steve and Alex. Lenny was covered in blood. You could tell he's been busy. He was holding multiple sliced-off heads to show of his victory. Your friends are all dead. I personally finished them. I enjoyed it. Now you're next. He lunged at Steve with a large sword, but it was Alex instead who jumped in front of Steve to take the blow. The sword went straight through Alex's neck, as that is where Lenny had aimed it to go. He then swung the sword to the right and Alex's head came clean off. Steve was consumed with hatred. He dived at the bomb, defused it, then grabbed Lenny and they both fell off of the edge of the Eiffel Tower.